And yet, has it ever been anything other than that? My law firm is honoured to work across the continent in a range of cases and projects, both for governments and for private investors. For Omnia Strategy, Africa is very much our second home. And of course, I myself was privileged during the time that my husband was in Downing Street for those 10 years to visit so many African countries, from Sierra Leone to Tanzania, from South Africa to Egypt. So I have been able to see for myself the hope, the energy, and the resolve of the people in Africa, and indeed the progress that has been made. And it's not just me who says this. Just last week, The Economist described a third great surge of interest in Africa. But it doesn't do more than just have a surge of interest which then fades away. It has to become a sustainable platform, springboard for progress. So we have to be careful of the Africa rising narrative, and we can't just take it for granted that that rise will endlessly progress. We have to also recognize the challenges, the setbacks, the poor practices, and the missed opportunities. So how can we make investment work in practice? And how can it lend itself to prosperity in Africa and for Africa? Responsible and impactful investment means acting with purpose to meet the social and environmental challenges we face, rather than the business as usual approach with little concern for such problems. It means understanding how your project will affect others, not just the bottom line, but how does it affect our partners, our employees, our suppliers, and the communities in which we work. It means having robust processes to avoid or minimize the social and economic harm, and to provide a remedy when such injury is caused. And it means businesses recognizing that being a good corporate citizen isn't just a nice to have, it is essential to be able to do good business. Because by that, you can meet legal and stakeholder expectations, you build relationships and reputation resilience, and avoid the cost and disruption of future disputes. You know, and this is not just me speaking. Investors around the world are beginning to recognize the business case. Last year, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the epitome, if you like, of a hard-headed investor, stressed that he was concerned in investing with businesses who do business with purpose. And just to make that case again, he's reiterated it in his New Year message this year too. And indeed, 90% of the world's largest fund managers have signed the UN Principles of Responsible Investment, which shows they recognise this is an important issue. We now have to see whether they actually act upon those fine words. It's not enough just to sign something, you have to live by those principles. But what does this mean for Africa? There is an urgent need for investment across Africa. Between 2015 and 2050, Africa's working age population is expected to increase by over 900 million. That is 70% of global growth. And by 2050, a projected 86% of people considered extremely poor will live, yes, in sub-Saharan Africa. But in 2017, foreign direct investment actually dropped in Africa to $42 billion from $49 billion the year before. And according to the World Economic Forum and the Africa Development Bank, Africa has an infrastructure funding gap of between $100 and $170 billion a year. In human terms, that means we're not doing enough to ensure families can power their homes, workers can travel to work, companies can do business, both in Africa and internationally, and governments can actually deliver on their policies. The population boom will place a great strain on Africa in terms of health and education and welfare. And the urgency and the competition for foreign direct investment can create an almost unbearable pressure on governments. To get the deal signed, and signed quickly, seems more important sometimes than getting a good deal. To make matters worse, competition for investment can incentivize investors to push hard for the maximum and quickest possible return for their money, leaving little room for impact assessments and long-term forecasting, which would lead to sustainable investment. But this is a false economy and is very damaging. Remember, if a deal looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. As someone who's often brought in to try and solve problems when things go wrong, I have seen accidents and scandals result from this rush to sign on the dotted line without proper analysis and planning. I have seen ill-conceived deals that seem destined to fail, and I've seen transactions unpicked because a change of government has shed light on obviously unfair practices, even tainted by corruption. Increasingly, governments and business are being held to account in these situations. Worldwide, investment arbitration is rocketing. Last year, 56 claims were registered before the World Bank Investment Arbitration Centre, known as ICSID. That's twice as many cases as were registered in the 30 years from 1972 to 2001. The curve is literally accelerating. In the last 5 years, investment cases have been registered involving 23 African states. Now, with each case on average costing $5 to $6 million just to defend, and that excludes any awards, and taking 4 years to conclude, and that doesn't even take into account enforcement proceedings, this is time and money that could be spent much more productively. And in addition, investors and companies are now facing increasing levels of security in courts outside Africa. Just 8 weeks ago today, I was at the Supreme Court here in London, where Vedanta Resources, the British mining company, was resisting a claim relating to its operations in Zambia. This is just one example of litigations where parent companies stand accused of being responsible for harms, in this case to the environment, being done by their subsidiaries in other parts of the world. What goes on in Africa no longer stays in Africa. And there are similar claims, not just here in the UK, but around the world. And as you can see, in these cases, the only people that benefit from the problem arising from the investment are, of course, the lawyers. And believe me, actually, I do not want this. I said earlier, there's no shortage of hope in Africa, and I am optimistic. In my experience, the right strategy and a proactive and capable team can navigate the challenges. And you can't always anticipate what lies in store for you, but having acted for governments and for investors on all sides of the dispute, let me offer 4 pieces of advice. First, always identify the impacts of your project and keep it under review. No project operates in its own little bubble, detached from the rest of the world. So when you do your due diligence, make sure you understand the context of your investment and identify whose rights and interests may be affected. Do not assume this will be obvious. You need to think creatively, consult experts, invest in relationships, and engage meaningfully with your stakeholders. And who do I mean by stakeholders? You need to get out and about. Talk to the local communities in which you operate. Speak to the representatives of the workers who will be working for you, and talk with civil society organisations. As well as creating valuable goodwill, they might actually know something that you can't afford to ignore. Remember the warning from Anglo-American CEO, who said in 2014, that more than $25 billion worth of mining projects are held up due to disputes with local communities. What prudent investor would not want an early warning system when such troubles could be brewing? Let me be honest. In the throes of a fast-moving new opportunity, due diligence, impact assessments, and stakeholder engagement, they don't seem very exciting. But it is crucial, and there is one thing to do when something important seems unexciting. You have to make it mandatory. You need to build it into your processes, make people accountable. Look again at your public procurement rules, your CapEx budget approval procedure, your investment committee processes. Are they really fit for purpose? Will you spot the warning signs before you sign on the dotted line? Or will the first indication of trouble be an accident, a community protest, a project breakdown, or an international scandal? Buy-in from the top is critical. We can't simply delegate responsibility for ESG, environment, social and governance issues, to a CSR department. It has to be integrated in the business, in the investments, and in the government strategies. The tone from our leaders must stress the importance of getting this right. So secondly, find the right partners. Partners who understand your priorities and who share your vision and values. Investors, are you dealing with a government that really has its people's best interests at heart? Are you forcing through a too-good-to-be-true contract without regard to the fairness or the state's policy concerns? In either case, if the political climate changes and the deal is scuppered, do you really want to litigate your way out of that? Government officials, ask yourselves whether an investor has a positive track record in your country and elsewhere. Have you looked for warning signs, even when things seem above board? Right now, I'm fighting a case for a state against a really unsavoury investor who had a habit of buying up oil block licenses, doing nothing with them, and then suing the government to make a profit. You've probably come across this scenario. To make matters worse, a serial litigator had done this repeatedly against a number of states along the African coastline. If only these countries had talked together, if they'd shared their experiences with dealing with this investment, maybe some of this harm and heartache could have been avoided. 3, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Sometimes, despite your best efforts and disagreements, disputes may simply be unavoidable. Agreeing how to address such problems at the outset, when everyone's friendly and excited and on their best behaviour, is the best course. Invariably, of course, I would say this, it means you have to have a good, clear, robust and fair contract in place. And do not forget about the international investment treaties, which can contain important provisions that protects both the host state and the investors. Yes, we lawyers, we love our contracts and our treaties. And I won't pretend that sometimes they seem tedious, but believe me, they are important. A good contract will serve as a roadmap for resolving issues before they become disputes. And it will focus minds on the trickiest aspects of a deal at the outset, and hopefully flush out any deal breakers before the deal is done and then subsequently broken. Equally, a good investment treaty will facilitate foreign direct investment by providing legal certainty and a neutral disputes resolution mechanism. But a poor treaty can cause huge problems, especially if it restricts a state's ability to pursue legitimate changes in public policy. So make sure you establish the right rules of the game and that your terms of business are clear, accurate and well understood. And make sure you have the right team on hand to help you do this. Which brings me to my last, 4th recommendation. Resolve conflicts creatively and amicably. Now, people don't always associate that with lawyers, but bear with me. If a dispute does arise, it's best to be imaginative and to search for common ground and an agreed settlement. Because, as I said earlier, investment disputes are expensive, very expensive, and very time-consuming. And also, they should always come with a health warning of unexpected results. Judges and arbitrators are only human, after all, and sometimes they make extraordinary decisions, as we've seen with the recent decision in relation to Nigeria, which could end up with, 3% of the GDP of that country going to an Irish investor who never actually did anything in that country. Furthermore, of course, like any litigation, often it entrenches animosities and makes an ongoing commercial relationship difficult. So, even when you've won, you can have difficulties enforcing, and that in itself can be a whole new battle, so that legal triumphs can sometimes be hollow victories. And what we've seen in that Nigeria case I've just referred you to is now a venture funds investing in the firm in order to try and get as much money as possible out of Nigeria. We've seen before vulture funds in related to debt in Africa. Are we going to be seeing the vulture funds now trying to take over enforcement of awards? Let's get it right in the first place and stop this happening. Through my work at Omnia, I've seen how even the most one-sided and difficult disputes can actually be settled if the right strategy is executed. We had a recent case where my client's commercial relationship with the host state broken down. It seemed irreparable. And furthermore, its legal position wasn't great either. So we needed to be creative, and ultimately we were able to negotiate a win-win outcome, which meant that the parties were able to do business together in the future. And then in another time in West Africa, my client was losing $40 million a year from withheld licenses. So, rather than embarking on an aggressive legal challenge, we tried to find out through using intelligence what was the real cause of the problem. And it was an unscrupulous competitor, and indeed, that nasty word, corruption. So we were able to unblock the licenses, not by using corruption, and avoid costly litigation. So you need the right team, you need the right advisors who have the right approach. And they should share your philosophy and values. So to conclude, as we invest in our common future, we must think of Larry Fink's words and fulfill our purpose and responsibilities to stakeholders so that we can reap long-term rewards. Because the alternative is to stumble and fall and fail. And so we see Africa rising a third time, simply becoming Africa falling a third time. This means investing not just in and across Africa, but in its talented population. Invest in young people, like the young people we've already heard about today. By 2050, as we've heard, the continent will have the largest number of young people, making up nearly twice the young populations of South Asia and Southeast Asia, East Africa and Oceania combined. Invest in women. Well, I would say that. Of course, gender inequality is generally thought to cost Africa around $100 billion a year. Invest in the women like Chiona Ukoma from Lagos, who was supported by my foundation in our businesswoman development program there, and who's now leading successfully a campaign to ensure that Lagos starts properly recycling its waste by giving incentives to the local population to do just that. Last Friday was International Women's Day, and it's our annual reminder of the huge untapped resource that the women of the world are. And this is especially true of the extraordinary women, young and old, that we see in Africa. Until states, investors and businesses are unlocking the potential of all people in Africa, responsible investment, inclusive growth, and long-term solutions with sustainable impacts will not be fully achieved. It's no small feat. We have much work to do to ensure that this third time of Africa Rising actually is the time that Africa truly takes its place on the world stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and that keynote speech really highlighted a number of the critical issues that Africa faces that we will discuss today and tomorrow as part of the Commonwealth Africa Summits. Mrs. Blair discussed the fact that gender inequality costs Africa $100 billion per annum in lost opportunities, and we will certainly have a panel tomorrow and on women's issues in the Commonwealth and Africa, and we'll also discuss that topic in our fifth panel about investing in our common future, and we'll look at the opportunities for women in that regard. Of course, some of that $100 billion of inequality, so to speak, is due to corruption, which you referred to as that nasty word, and we will have a whole panel on corruption later today as well. I was struck by the fact that the need for open and transparent legal structures for investments is very important, and as someone who worked with the government of Malawi, I was a Fulbright advisor to the government of Malawi working on mining. Her comment about the fact that there are $25 billion worth of mining projects in Africa that are being held up by the fact that local bureaucrats and local resistance cannot be overcome. And I just want to give one graphic illustration of that. Farmers under Malawian law were compensated for mining projects that were ongoing in their area. And one of the issues that we dealt with when I was with the ministry was when there was aerial surveys that were proposed for areas, which would just be photographers from planes taking photos of the area. Farmers in areas would request from the Malawian government compensation to just have these photographs taken from the air, even though that was perfectly legal under Malawian law. So there certainly is a number of challenges. And she also, I believe, highlighted not just the challenges, but the opportunities that exist in Africa. In her memorable words, what happens in Africa no longer just stays in Africa. And I think that the quality and the candor discussion that we've already had this morning shows that what is going on in the continent is really reaching across the Commonwealth and across the globe. So with those closing remarks, we will close the opening ceremony because Baroness Cherie Flather, who addressed us, for those of you who were at the House of Parliament last night, will not be able to join us this morning, but will be able to join us this afternoon. So we're looking forward to hearing her speech. She is the co-chair of the Commonwealth Africa Initiative, and Baroness Flather will be addressing us later this afternoon. So for now, we will take a brief intermission before beginning our first plenary session on stimulating economic growth through investment in entrepreneurs at 10:40. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. All the speakers in the opening session this morning who were so kind, many of you, to give goodwill remarks, please approach the front of the dais and we will take a group photo of the speakers, or any of the speakers if you're speaking later as well. Please join us.